Neighbor's dogs kill co-worker's cat. Co-worker ruins their Christmas. Quick note. I was part of this story but not the dealer nor receiver of the revenge. Years ago, I used to work with a receptionist in a vet clinic named Margot. Margot was and still is a very sweet 65-year-old woman who had been at this practice since it was open. Some 40 years ago. She always had a smile. A joke. Compliments and baked goods for your birthday. She never had an unkind word to say about anyone. She was seriously one of the coolest people I had ever worked with, and she basically knew everyone. From our regular clients to our mailman's granddaughter. The only bad thing about Margot, and this was not her fault, was that she and her family lived next to one of the trashiest, nastiest families I had ever met that had two even nastier pit bulls. I'm talking nastier than SHT, that had been hoarded by dung beetles for years. Nasty. And these dogs were constantly escaping and terrorizing the neighborhood. Even trying to get into her house. Margot had asked them more than once to please keep the dogs contained. Especially since she had an elderly, fat cat named Smokestack, and these pits had attacked smaller animals before. The family basically told her to rot in hell. That they knew what they were doing. How dare she accuse the breed? Yada yada. Basically blowing her off. Margot knew there had been reports filed against her neighbors, but nothing had ever been done about it really. So she made sure to keep Smokestack in the house to keep him safe, and was very careful not to let him out. If you have been paying attention up until this point, you'll notice I'm using the word was and had regarding old Smokestack. And it was as awful as you think. 3 weeks before Christmas, Margot had the day off and was in the garage with Smokestack fiddling with some Christmas decorations. Unbeknownst to her, the pits next door got out and broke through the bottom of her garage door. They went right for Smokestack before she could blink and started to tear the cat apart. Margot screamed for help, and it was only when her son and husband came out with a baseball bat that they were able to free Smokestack from the jaws of these dogs. I was working this day and will never forget when she came in. Crying harder than I had ever seen anyone cry in my life. Clutching poor dying Smokestack in her arms. Her husband had to hold her while we tried to bring Smokestack back, but we couldn't do it. It would have taken a miracle of God and then some, and he passed away, a truly crap way to go in what should have been the golden years of his fat cat life. Margot sat there for a while with his mangled body. Quietly crying for a while before she finally kissed whatever part of him was still intact and stood up. She told us all, "I've got a job to do. Take care of him, girls," and then left. We figured Margot would take a few days off to be with family and then continue on with life as normal. We figured wrong. Now when I say Margot knew everyone, I mean everyone. Right after she left the hospital, Margot gathered herself up and went to the police with pictures of poor Smokestack and told her story. The same police officers she had watched grow up over the last 20 years from rowdy middle schoolers she used to help babysit to the officers they were today. They were absolutely shocked to hear what had happened to their surrogate grandma and pushed her case to the front of the line. The case found itself before a judge whose daughter had gone to school with Margot's daughter. The judge granted an emergency, dangerous animal extraction warrant to her neighbors. Of course, there was a hearing, within 2 weeks, which I gotta admit, was ridiculously fast. The neighbors tried to argue that their dogs weren't aggressive. They even went so far as to accuse Margot of having it out for their family and making it all up. But their argument trickled when the dozens of dangerous animal reports were presented and finally completely dried out when Margot presented the surveillance video her grandson had gotten showing the dogs coming into her property and attacking poor Smokestack. The emergency extraction and humane destruction of her neighbor's dogs was granted. It was Christmas Eve when Margot heard a knock on her door. She opened it up to see the neighbors standing there, sobbing uncontrollably. They were begging her to stop animal control, that they had these dogs since they were puppies. How the kids would be devastated and it would ruin Christmas, and if she could find it in her heart to give the dogs another chance. Up until this moment, the neighbors had behaved abominably. They didn't offer to fix the garage. They never apologized for trying to slander her name in court. Hell, they didn't even pay for Smokestack to be cremated. At no point had they even shown the slightest shred of remorse for what damage their dogs had done. And as the neighbors stood there, blubbering and whimpering about how this was going to ruin their Christmas, Margot looked them straight in the eye and told them, In her calmest voice, "You took away my family. So now I'm taking yours," and shut the door in their face just as animal control pulled up onto the driveway. Margot was not surprised as she watched the dogs get hauled into the truck and taken away. After all, it was her idea for animal control to take the dogs on Christmas Eve. A perk from having known the AC officer supervisor for years. Margot even made sure the dogs were euthanized before the outside Christmas lights turned on that night. The family never received the remains, nor did they ever get a chance to bring another animal into their family, as the father proceeded to drunk drive into a telephone pole that same night, killing him instantly. Mom went off the deep end, so CPS picked up the kids by February. And ultimately, the house foreclosed in September. Despite how traumatic Smokestack's death was, I'd like to think that if the neighbors had shown at least some regret, Margot might not have gone as far as she did. She is still the person to forgive and forget. Or maybe, she ultimately knew it had to be done. To push it to this point of no return before another family lost a member to these irresponsible neighbors. Either way, thank you Margot for making the world a little bit safer for the pets in the world. And rest in peace, Smokestack. Hopefully I'll see you on the other side with your favorite orange sock and a can of tuna. TLDR. Coworker's cat is killed by neighbor's dogs. Coworker destroys neighbor's family on Christmas Eve. This actually seems like nuclear revenge material right here. I was debating that, but nuclear revenge seems intentionally, well, nuclear, and I don't think Margot intended for the whole family to basically implode. To be fair, a neighbor that raises dogs who kill neighbors' pets isn't on solid ground to start. Good people will often be very tolerant and forgiving. But once you push them too far, you're FCKED. Demons run. When good women go to war. Update simply for the DW quote. I'm not saying I don't believe this story. But the father drunk killing himself that same night? And Margot getting the dogs euthanized? All in the span of a few hours? Are vet offices even open on Christmas Eve? I find all that a bit of a stretch to believe. This reads like fiction. Op knows that the neighbors came up sobbing uncontrollably, and Margot says in her calmest voice with a verbatim quote. Maybe it's inspired by true events, but this reads like something only Margot would be able to write. How many years was she? 65? She has been 65 for the last 2 centuries. I love animals. But these ones sounded so dangerous. Small child might not stand a chance if the dogs got to it. I hope those people never own another pet. Ultimately it's their responsibility to raise and train dogs right. And not doing so lead to such pain for all those involved. Well, one of them is certainly never owning a pet again. This was the toughest one to read. Poor Smokestack. Cats are amazing. This really hit me hard, this story. I believed this right up until. Come on. Op forgot the part where Margot got a lottery ticket the same night and won the jackpot. Removed. I mean, who in the frick is upvoting these posts? I know bots. But not all bots. So who are the humans believing this weird fantasy? I'm a veterinarian who has had to euthanize dogs that have been inappropriately housed and cared for, left to roam or kept on insecure premises, and have subsequently attacked another animal or a human. Some of those dogs were perfectly friendly under the right circumstances. But the owners failed to heed the advice of myself and others in regards to specific triggers for their aggression. You can never trust them to be well behaved at all times, no matter what. How well any dog behaves is always 100% the responsibility of the owner. Even my overtly placid golden retriever is housed securely, handled appropriately at the dog park, and never trusted alone around unfamiliar animals. My Great Dane I know for sure would kill any cat she could get her jaws on. And as a result she is secured in a full enclosed patio when I'm not at home that she cannot escape. And cats cannot get into either. I've had the owners of these dogs crying, begging me not to go ahead. I always make it crystal clear to them that they're right. It's not the dog's fault. It's yours. You made this happen through your carelessness. And this is the painful price everyone pays as a result of it. The dog, the owners, And I, who can see this dog under the right care would be fine. But because of the local laws I have to destroy your dog once it actively attacks or kills outside of your property. It angers me immensely to have to do it. About 10 years ago our neighbor's dog killed my cat. He used to roam the neighborhood and cause problems. The owner knew there was a hole in the fence. He was just too lazy to do anything about it. The dog was constantly in an aggressive stance and you never knew which way the encounter was going to go. After he killed my cat, my family, I was out of state at the time, told the owner it was his fault the dog was out of control and didn't want him to be euthanized for someone else's frick up. So to get him into training, otherwise animal services would be called. He didn't do jack shiz about it. And a few months later the dog bit a person and was euthanized anyway. The guy went out and got 2 golden retrievers right after. I'm still so disgusted by that man. I'm sorry, I do want to believe this story and I'm sure events very similar may have happened in real life. However, the tone of voice seems either clearly dramatized or entirely falsified. Margot just conveniently having all the right connections, and the hardest part to believe is the dog's getting euthanized for attacking a cat. Euthanasia typically isn't enforced until the dog bites a human. TLDR, clearly fake. I don't even know what you gain from this. It is one of the fakest stories I have ever read. Tone tells. I need to keep reminding myself I did the right thing when reporting a dangerous dog. I have a horse and where I keep him. The house next door is abandoned and occupied by squatters. They don't bother us and we keep our peace. But one day I was riding my horse out of the paddock and I heard barking coming from the house. Next thing, a giant pit bull came out and was chasing us. My horse bolted and luckily no cars were on the street or we may have been in serious trouble. The dog chased us across the street and into the park for a few minutes. After I knew I was safe, I had the biggest panic attack of my life. I called my paddock mate and she called the council on my behalf. Within a few hours I got a call from the council to give my statement. Then I got a call the next day to say they have picked up the dog. I feel so guilty because I know that dog was put down. But it was living with drug addicts and had no fencing to keep it secure. Across from a park where people walk with their children and dogs. I know I did the right thing for my horse's safety, but man, that dog didn't choose to live in a fucking crack den. I know. I was attacked by 3 dogs and only one bit me. I wasn't even going to report it, but my doctor actually made me when he stitched me up because he said it could happen to a kid on our street and that made me feel terrible. So I did. I went to the police station and then went to animal control and they made these people surrender their dog. But they didn't surrender the one that bit me, they just surrendered one that they did not want. Which was actually not one of the ones that was aggressive. When animal control called me to identify the dog, I went up there and as soon as I saw it I said, "That's not the right one," and I just burst into tears. People are so heartless. I actually know the bee who did this and I can't wait to run into her in person one of these days and tell her exactly what I think. While I love dogs, this is the exact reason I dislike bully breeds. Yes, they can be soft, loving animals. But they're so powerful that any ounce of aggression is dangerous. A friend of my partner had a staffy, so not even the strongest, most aggressive type, and there was a time we were playing with her and the play was so rough I was actually getting a bit scared and had to ask my partner to pull her off me. She just wasn't backing down when I was pushing her off. She thought it was part of the game. I had a pit mix for 8 years and she was the biggest sweetheart to me and my wife and all my nieces and nephews. I dismissed the pit fears as bad owners or lack of training. But there was definitely aggression towards neighbors and other dogs. When she died I decided to get a lab mix, and only now after 2 years with a different kind of dog can I really see and admit to it. Pits are dangerous. I love them and they make fantastic pets. But they need experienced owners and lots of socializing, and not just anyone should be allowed to own one.